Good day, sport coaches. Welcome to the course, which is called Genetic Sports Coaching. This video lecture is recorded for all types of sports coaches. It doesn't matter what sports that you are coaching. You might be coaching soccer, you might be coaching netball, volleyball, or whatever sporting code that you are coaching. The video is intended to give you some basic insight into coaching, or is intended to give you some coaching tips. So I want you to join along as we watch this video, and at the end of this presentation I will send you a couple of videos that are found from YouTube that will also be relevant to what we are doing. So I want you to come along as we continue. So the title of this unit standard is Plan Practice Sessions and Teach Sport Skills. This is a level 5 unit standard, which is 10 credits. So I hope you enjoy the course. So I want us to look at the number of sections that will cover. You will pick this up from your learner guide as well. The first section we'll look at is section 1, which is plan a training session. We will talk about this in length, and then we'll look at the coaching tips for indigenous athletes, and we'll look at tips on how to coach older athletes. And then section 4 will look at inclusive coaching. Section 5 will look at the tips on your coaching children. And then section 6 will look at the gross motor skills. And section 7 is more practical. We'll look at practice plans or practice sessions. So I want you to come along as we continue. I think the first thing that I thought I should start with, which is not even in your manual, it is in your manual but not in this order. I thought let me begin with what I call the safety tips and precautions. My suggestion is when you are watching this presentation, make sure you have the slides with you. So at the end of this presentation, I will forward you the slides that I am presenting from. One of the key things when you are working with athletes is the safety. I thought I should talk to you about it first because it's the key thing. It has to be done first before you do anything. You have to ensure the safety of the athletes or the players. Like I said, this doesn't matter who you're working with. You might be working with grown-ups, you might be working with kids. It doesn't matter. The most important thing when you are running a sports coaching session is to maximize the safety of the athletes that you are coaching. So let's go on a journey. I'll just explain a few things that would enhance the safety of your athletes and the safety of the environment. So the first thing I will talk about is warm up and cool down. Warm up and cool down, very important in a sports coaching program. And of course, I will talk about warm up and cool down in length later on. And I've provided some video clips on warm up that I would like you to watch after this session. It will give you an idea of how a proper warm up can be planned or organized for your athletes or players. Now, warm up is something that is done first before you embark on an exercise session. It can be 5 minutes, it can be 10 minutes. It depends on a number of factors such as how much time you've got and the number of athletes, and sometimes it depends on the weather. When it's a bit hot, you may not need to do a very long warm up because the weather allows you to do a short warm up. So there are many factors to it, as well as the cool down, which I'll talk to you about it later on as well. The second thing to enhance your safety is to prioritize rest and recovery. Now, there are two terms here that we are looking at. The first term is rest. What it means, the athletes or the players, they need to rest. Now, rest and recovery, you can't separate the two. We rest so that we recover. So there are many ways you can rest. You can rest in between the drills during your coaching session. You can rest after the coaching session, or you can rest during off season. So the key thing here is that you can't train every day. There should be a day that there is no coaching session so that athletes can recover. Remember, training, it makes them exhausted. So when they rest, they recover the energy that they lost the previous day. So that's very important. So rest is part of every training session. If they don't rest, they burn out. If they don't rest, they get overtrained, and a lot of things can happen. They can end up in injury and many things. Number three is to ensure that you've got working equipment. I know at grassroots, coaches, they violate a lot of these rules. But one of the key things is to make sure that your equipment is in good condition. That will promote the safety of your athletes. Number four is to carry out a risk assessment. Risk assessment is to scan even the environment where you are coaching. If you are using a community football pitch or a park, before you start, you may need to go around the pitch to check, to scan if there are no wires, bottles, stones, and any dangerous objects that are lying around that might harm your players. So this is very, very important. And also some risk assessment, you can even ask, you can talk to the players and ask if they don't have any condition or medical condition that could cause problems. You may find out some of the players are asthmatic. So if you don't carry this assessment, this could cause you problems. One of the things I've always recommended is that before you embark on a coaching session with your players, it's very important to do some screening. Screening tells you who the people are, what medical conditions they have. You may find out that some of your players are low risk players, some of them are high risk, and anytime you have a high risk player, you may need to get that person cleared by the doctor. If you are working with kids, let's say you've got a child who's asthmatic, or a child who's got epilepsy, or a child who's got a chronic heart condition, you may need to get a letter of consent from the parent. For these things, they can come back to you as a coach sometime later. Prepare an emergency action plan. This is very important. In case of emergency, what do you do? There should be some sort of a plan of action. For example, during big events, you would see an ambulance on standby. Now, this is some form of emergency plan. Should something happen, there should be something that you can do. So all these are important. You may need to have some important numbers of parents, so that if something happens, you know who to call. The next one, make sure that players are wearing the right protective gear. For example, if you are working with football players, they need to wear their shin guards. If you are working with cricketers, they need to wear their helmets. So this varies from sport to sport. But if you look at almost all sports, they've got some sort of a protective gear that must be worn by all players or athletes. So make sure all these things are in place. The next one is very important, especially when working with kids. Get the parents involved. I know this becomes a problem when you work with African kids. As you know, that we don't have much participation from parents as Africans. But this is something that you can try and sort out, because when parents are involved, parents, they get to tell you some of the medical history that the child might have, that even the child might not know about. So the involvement of parents, we always advise that coaches must have some sort of a relationship with the parents of the kids they are coaching. You may need to have maybe parents meeting, maybe once a month or once in a quarter, just to get to know the parents of the kids. Once you know the parents of the kids, it's very easy for the parents to release their children to you as a coach. The last one here is to practice correct technique. Make sure you practice the right technique all the time. And may I add something called fair play. Make sure that the players are encouraged to play fairly during practice sessions. If this does not happen, that's when now a lot of injuries that shouldn't have taken place take place. So we need to encourage them to play well and not have an aim to hurt each other. So now I want us to look at section number 1, which is planning a training session. Now, as a coach, as a sports coach, one of your responsibilities is to plan. You cannot just show up in a session without a plan. So we advise all coaches to have a planning manual. Sometimes we refer to it as a logbook or a coaching diary. Meaning, when I rock up in my session, I know exactly what I'm going to do on that day. So we call that the training plan. So I've provided here some of the few things that your training plan need to have. The first thing is the session introduction. When you arrive at the training session, you may need to do some brief introduction whereby you greet the players and you tell them what you are going to do on that day. That's very important. Get to check if everybody is fine, they are ready for the activity, any problems, anything they want to tell you. Once that is sorted, then you can begin with the training session. Now, every training session begins with warm-up. Now, if you look at the presentation, I've provided a number of tips there under warm-up. The first one is the why. Why do we do warm-up? As explained previously, warm-up is done to prevent unnecessary injuries. So we warm up to prevent injuries. We warm up to increase or enhance participation or performance. So when you warm up, blood flow, it gets enhanced, the body temperature goes up. So there is a huge advantage. That's why we say never exercise when the body is cold. Now, the duration of the warm-up, it depends. It depends on how much time you've got. It can depend on the weather. It can depend even on the type of sport that you are doing. So warm-up can vary from 5 minutes to 10, even 15 minutes if maybe you are doing a team sport like football, whereby you are doing different drills or players that group up in numbers of 5. So you may need to spend more time because the group is larger. But if you are just training one person, you may not spend so much time. That's why I said sometimes it depends on the sport that you are warming up for. Now, what types of activities can you do when you warm up? Once again, it depends on the sport. Warm up can be generic, whereby it's just a generic total body warm up, or warm up can be sport specific. Sport specific is, let's say if you are a footballer, your sport specific warm up will be activities that focus on the legs because football is mainly a leg sport. If you are a cricketer, you may need to do activities that focus more on the arms because that's what you use, for example, as a bowler. So warm up can be generic and warm up can also be specific. So these are the different types of warm up that you can do. So you can do activities such as running, skipping, cycling. And what I've done, you'll see on the video clip that I've recorded. I think the warm up you'll be watching is a football specific warm up and the netball specific warm up. So those warm up, they are specific. They give you drills, warm up drills that are specific to those two sporting codes. Now, the next thing on your session is the game or skills or fitness activities. Now, this is the main thing. After you have done your warm up, perhaps you do some stretches, then you go to the main thing, which is referred to as the main course. Now, that will be the activities that we have planned for the day. So, whatever drills that you have planned for that day, or it could be a mini game, whatever it is. Usually, the second part, it takes longer because it's the main thing. And then once you're done with your activity, the last thing you do is cool down. Again, I've come up with questions. Why do we cool down? We cool down to minimize muscle soreness. We cool down to get the body back to normal. We cool down because it is the right thing to do. Remember, we end the way we have started. So it's more like we exercise in a triangle. So you warm up here, you exercise there, and you drop it to normal, which is called cool down, and then after that you go home. Once again, I'll find some videos that you can watch on cool down just to make it more clearer. And finally, before you let the players go home, you do something called a session review. Review, that's when you sit with your players and you check, guys, how was the session? Did you enjoy the session? If they have some questions, you can answer those questions. And the next thing we're looking at is the gathering information and setting goals. Now, this talks to us as coaches. When you are coaching these players, one of the things you need to have is the information about them. So one of the questions you would ask them is the previous experience in sport. We call this know your players. So you need to know when you're working with players that have you played sport. Now here we are assuming that perhaps you are working with a new group that you do not know. You may need to ask these questions. That is it your first time? Have you played sports before? So that you know exactly how to pitch up your sessions. And then you can check if they've got some goals that they may want to achieve so that you can assist them through those things. And one of the key things is to check if they've got any illness or medical conditions. Like I said, you have to know the players, and if you don't ask for this information, they will not give it to you. Now, just a few tips for planning a training session or planning a training activity. So I'll give you a number of tips that you can perhaps use during your sessions. Number one is the session content. Now, under session content, we have something called overplan rather than to underplan. Now, we spoke about this before, that as a coach, never show up at your session without a plan. Coaches are supposed to use coaching logs or coaching diary. So that tells you exactly what you'll be doing from Monday to Friday. And very important, every session must have a variety of activities. Now you'll notice when you are coaching kids, if you let them do one thing the whole hour, they get bored. So your coaching session must have a variety of activities so that your sessions are fun and enjoyable by all. The next one is appropriate activities. Avoid activities that require inactivity, meaning your drills must involve everybody. And avoid activities that focus on a small group at a time. We need to make sure that everybody takes part at the same time, because people, when they sit and do nothing, they get bored. So make sure that your sessions are very much inclusive. Take note of ability and age. If you are coaching a group that is very dynamic in age, you need to make sure that all these different age categories of people are catered for. Now, this also it's also applicable when you work with different genders. When you work with boys and girls, you notice that they are different in terms of their ability. So your sessions must not discriminate, against gender. They have to include both guys and girls. And your sessions must be very progressive on the next one. Very progressive, meaning you have to keep going up the game so that you move on, you step up the session. If that could be intensity driven. And then you practice. The most important thing about coaching sessions, if you teach a drill, give the players enough time to practice. When they practice the drill, they become more perfect at it. Now, I want to give you an example of how to plan or organize a coaching session. These are just a few tips to assist you, because I believe at the end of this module, you will have to group up, whereby you'll be required to plan a training session. I think it's one of your summative assessments. The first thing here is the training area. When you are running a training session, you have to find a venue. Where will the training take place? That is very important. So look for open spaces that you could use. It could be a community pitch, whatever open space that you can use. You have to identify that area. And please do some screening or assessment of the facility so that there will be no injuries. Arrange relevant equipment. Decide on the sport that you are going to coach and arrange equipment that talks to that sport. Decide on the grouping. How many players do you have? Do you have 5? Do you have 10? If you have 10, do you split them into 2, or do you work with them as that big group of 10 people? Decide on what to do. This is activity. What activity do you do for warm-up? What activity do you do for your day? What activity do you do for your cool down? Like I said earlier on, as a coach, you cannot show up without a plan. You must have a coaching log that will tell you what you are doing each day. And number 5, be very conscious of safety precautions. I spoke to you about this. Safety is very, very important when you're doing sports coaching. And I'll end it here for now, and I'll come back to you later on with another presentation that will be giving you more information. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed the presentation.